Well, I think we are at 9 o'clock, and I want to thank everybody for being here. This press conference, the purpose of this press conference is to inform the public about what's going on with House Bill 605 in the legislative process. There's been a lot of coverage about this bill, but 4 years ago, this has been a very long journey, and it started 4 years ago. I've been in the General Assembly 8 years, and the last 4 years of my legislative life has been devoted to the cause of opening up civil justice for victims of childhood sexual abuse. I want to say thank you to the survivors of child sexual abuse who have pushed this measure over the last 4 years. I want to thank all of the advocates. I want to say a special thank you to the Speaker's office. The Speaker of the House's office is an absolutely rock-solid supportive of House Bill 605. The House has also voted 170 to nothing on House Bill 605, and I want to thank my colleagues for their rock-solid support. I want to say thank you to Senator Greg Kirk for being the champion of this bill in the Senate this year. I also want to extend a thank you to Senator Renee Unterman for being the champion for the original Hidden Predator Act 3 years ago, House Bill 17. She led on that time at that point in the Senate. So the Senate can do the right thing. It is capable of doing the right thing. But this press conference is not about holding a legislative obituary for House Bill 605. What this press conference is about is to encourage the state Senate to do the right thing. There is still time to do the right thing. As I have stated before, child sexual abuse is the murdering of a child's soul. The person almost becomes emotionally lobotomized for the rest of their lives. And in some cases, it's almost as if it's worse than murder because they have to live with the pain as they go through life. Because the victim is living with this pain, there are so many issues that it takes, and that's why it results in delayed disclosure of this issue for the adult who was the child that was abused. I call on the state Senate to do the right thing. The state Senate has 15 hours left in this day to do it and pass a meaningful bill so that it doesn't leave victims behind. The current bill right now in its current form in the Senate leaves victims behind. I don't think the Senate wants to do that. I understand that this bill is an extraordinary measure, but guess what? So is child sexual abuse. This is not a slip and fall tort claim. This is not a fender bender. This is not a property dispute. So before I turn over this mic to others who have things to say, I want to remind everyone that we're moving into Easter weekend. And I would like to point out the irony that the Senate leadership in this week is failing to stand up for justice and choosing instead to wash its hands of their governing responsibility, just as government leaders did 2,000 years ago in the person of Pontius Pilate. This time, the same result will follow, the death of innocents. And the question is whether this generation's group of leaders will forever carry the blood on its hands for the complicity with special interest groups like the Boy Scouts of America, like USA Gymnastics, like the Catholic Church and others, who has systematically, strategically covered up for decades sexual abuse of innocent children. Right now, the Senate bill is predator-friendly, but we will continue to be one of the worst states in the country that provides civil justice for survivors of child sexual abuse. Georgia will continue to be a hub for child exploitation and trafficking. It's not a reputation we can be proud of. Let's wash this stain away today. The Senate still has time to do the right thing.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So I urge the Senate to also take up this measure because as Republican women, you know, this is something that we really need to do to protect children. these organizations have covered this up, and this shouldn't happen because these people hide out in these kind of organizations, and this bill smokes them out so that there aren't other victims of this crime. And I think women are watching to see what Republicans are doing, and so I also want to urge the Senate to take action and to remove the barriers to the lawsuits and the things that we're able to bring the predators to light and hold them accountable. And I really just urge them to take action today. Thank you.
I'm Representative David Dreyer, and Representative Spencer thanked a lot of people. But before I say anything else, I think that we owe a thanks to Representative Rakestraw and Representative Spencer for picking up this cause. And I'm proud I'm on their side for two reasons. A, I don't want to be in their way, for one. They've been fierce. But they're on the right side. I've had victims of sexual assault come to me and tell me that they never told anybody they were assaulted when they were teenagers. They're in their 40s. Some are married with children, and they never told anyone because they thought it was their fault somehow. But what we've learned is that there are just a few organizations, a very few, that covered it up. And they saw other students bring forward claims, and that those students were shut down, they were locked out, and they didn't have the same opportunities. So these victims learned that they couldn't say anything, or they felt so much shame. But over the last couple years, something's happened in our country, and victims have started coming forward. And when victims have come forward, all of a sudden, these victims connected the dots and realized there were dozens and dozens of other people that were in the exact same situation as them. And it wasn't their fault. It wasn't their fault that a predator in an organization targeted and assaulted them, and it wasn't their fault that that organization let that happen. So I'm really proud, too, of the people that I'm standing with on this. I'm really proud, too, of what the House has done on this. But the victims have been down here, and they've seen this process. And they've seen that, so far, the decisions haven't been made on the basis of public testimony in front of cameras and in front of the public. Decisions made behind closed doors among just a few very powerful people. And that's not what this process is supposed to be about. That's not what this process is to get a good, just result. So there is time. And I just want to urge the Senate that tomorrow, when we look back, and a year from now when we look back, whose side did we stand on? Do we stand with the people that were true victims? And are we proud of the process that we put in place to hear their concerns? Or do we do the wrong thing? And we told them again it's their fault. There's nothing that can be done for them. So I hope we can do something in the next 12 hours. Thank you.
Would you like to say something, Alan?
I'll try to,
Sure, go ahead.
if you don't mind. My name's Alan MacArthur, and I'm a survivor of sexual abuse by the hand of my scoutmaster, Ernest Bolin, beginning when I was 12 years old, and it went on for 4 years. And there's not a day that doesn't go by that I don't wake up thinking about what happened to me. And I have worked really hard to get past that. But it's difficult. Because of the shame that we live with, we inherently believe that there's something wrong with us, which is why this happened to us. But because of what's happening with this bill and what these lawmakers are doing, it's making it impossible for us to get closure. This isn't about money. This is just about us wanting to get closure with our past so we can go on with our future. And I just watching this process, it's very disempowering. And I'm so tired of the weakness, and I'm so tired of these people, these who feels okay to stand next to the pedophiles. Either you're on the side of survivors, either side of justice and what's morally right, or you decide you want to stand with the pedophiles. And that's just, it's not good. It's not right. So I urge whomever's out there who can make a difference, who can make this happen today, to make this happen. This is right. Georgia's a predator-friendly state. There's no denying that. And we're talking about, what you're talking about is sexual abuse, which is sex between adults and children. It's wrong. It's disgusting. It's immoral. There's nothing good about it. So, thank you.
We do have others here that we have other victims in the room. We have folks here ready to speak and tell their testimony in just a little bit. Ms. Matthews, would you like to come forward?
I would echo what my fellow survivor has said. I have something prepared, but I've been part of this process since the sausage making began in the House. And there were great pains taken by Representative Reeves and others to get us to the 170 votes unanimously. And we transferred over to the Senate Judiciary, and that's where I began to really lose heart. Because I was astounded, not necessarily by the what, but the who. I was astounded by the process being subverted because of bedfellows, whether monetary or political. And I would simply call upon the leaders today who still have time to make this right. It is true that it is the murdering of a child's soul. For me personally, even with my Savior, Christ, it is still a daily walkout. And it wasn't until this process of hearing other victims come forward and tell stories that I will never unsee. It is beyond me. It is unconscionable that someone in the Senate could sit and listen to the testimonies that I've heard, including my own, that you will never unsee, and choose the wrong side of right. It is disgusting. It is a horrible betrayal. And I, too, would still be stuck in the murder of my soul as a child. I do not have an entity that's held accountable for what happened to me. But I do have my Lord and Savior, who he's the reason for this season. So thank you, Representative Spencer, for your hard work and your voice. And thank you, Senator Kurt, for being on the right side of this. As a minister, I can tell you that people come to me at 60 you're never too old to be a victim. So I call upon Governor Deal. I call upon Lieutenant Governor Cagle and Senator Calzert, Senator Butch Miller, and Senator John Kennedy to get on the right side of right.
I'd like to introduce you to Brian Cornwell. He represents the victims in the case involving USA Gymnastics, and I'd like to give him a moment to speak.
As Representative Spencer said, my name is Brian Cornwell. I'm the lawyer, along with my former partner, Jeff Lasky, who started the initial lawsuit against USA Gymnastics here in Georgia. And the first thing I want to do is I want to take the opportunity to thank all the survivors who have come forward as a result of this bill, and especially Representative Spencer and other members of the legal profession who've looked after this bill and shepherded this bill, Darren Penn especially. And it's interesting to note that we have to realize why we're here. We're here because we have senators on the other side of the aisle who are not putting themselves on the right side of history. We have the opportunity here to right a wrong that should have been righted a long time ago. And if you look at what John Adams said is, if we stand on principle, even if we have to stand alone, then you understand why it is that we're here. Most victims don't realize that they're victims until late in life. They don't understand what they've been through. They don't understand how it affects them. And to hear the stories that I've heard and to hear the stories and the testimony that's come forward here, I don't see how you couldn't be on their side. We need to call out to all senators, not just those that are in leadership, but the rank and file senators, to tell their leadership, we're going to be on the right side of history on this. We're not going to listen to you. We're not going to be bought and paid for. Okay? We're going to listen to and we're going to stand by character. Because the true measure of a man's character is how he treats those who can't do anything for him. And if we look at that and we realize that the right thing to do here is stand on behalf of victims, then we ought to vote for House Bill 605 as presented. And we need to look at who we represent. We do not represent special interest as a representative or a senator. We represent the people. The people want this bill passed. All I can tell you to do is if you want to be on the right side of history and you're in the Senate, pass the bill. Thank you.
I'd like to recognize former state representative Bobby Lawson. Thank you.
I'm Bobby Lawson. I served as a state representative here in the Capitol from 1978 to 1994, a long time ago. But my wife and I have a son that was abused by a scoutmaster. And not until yesterday did I realize, when I read something Representative Spencer had written, that all you had to do was go across the state line, across the Savannah River into South Carolina. There, the predators are not protected, but we protect them here in Georgia, which has changed so much down here. I just can't comprehend the Senate not moving on this bill, and I pray to God they do today, because it's really affected our son. When you had changed, we didn't learn about it until 2 years ago, and he's still suffering from it. But anyhow, maybe God and Jesus can push the Senate to vote for it today. Thank you.
Also, like to take the time to recognize Ms. Esther Panich. She's representing the victims in one of the Boy Scouts cases.
Good morning. I understand that amnesty is a dirty word in Georgia, or Georgia politics. Yet what we're doing by allowing the Senate to gut the bill is giving amnesty to entities that they know have always hidden predators, even when they knew about them, and continue to hide predators. The problem is some of these senators are so conflicted professionally and personally because they sit on the boards of these entities like the Boy Scouts. Specifically, Senator Cowsert's law partner represents entities being sued by victims of abuse. Senator Kennedy's law partner is on the Executive Risk Management Board, and Senator Kennedy himself sits on an executive board of the Boy Scouts. If these men were judges in cases involving the Boy Scouts, they would have to be recused because of the appearance of impropriety. These men are lawyers. They just choose not to recuse themselves. Lieutenant Governor Cagle, I have to imagine you were unaware of their conflicts. I don't know how, but I'd have to imagine that, because I cannot imagine you would knowingly allow them to be in charge of lobbying behind closed doors for the death of HB 605 in order to protect their partners and the organizations they sit on. Please do not allow them to participate in this vote. Thank you.
And I just want to say briefly, my name is Natalie Woodward, and I represent 4 victims who have filed lawsuits who are pending presently. House Bill 605 does not just pave the way for other victims to come forward. It actually allows us to have a chance to open up the door that's closed right now in a file room somewhere in Texas, there are files from 1991 until 2018 that have never been released to the public. Hundreds, thousands, we don't know how many, ultimately. And those are files on people who are suspected child predators, many of which are most likely somewhere with a child right now. This is not just about things that happened 50 years ago. This is about more than 20 years of files that are still locked up, that we are trying to force the release of. So yes, some of these senators sit on the board of organizations that knowingly keep that information from the public. And it is a public nuisance, and we are all potentially affected by these secrets continuing to exist.
Also, right now, I'd like to recognize Mr. Darren Penn. He represents survivors in the Darlington case. You heard from one of the, also a Boy Scouts case. In Athens, Georgia, you heard from one of the victims earlier. Mr. Penn.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Darren Penn, and I too, at the very beginning, I just want to say thank you to Jason Spencer and Ms. Rakestraw for everything that you have done back in 2015 and continuing forward to today to try to get this bill right. Unfortunately, that we were not able to do the right thing back in 2015 and add the entities into this bill. And that's the main reason why we're here today. And without your work, everything that you've done over all this time, we wouldn't even be here today talking to you to even ask for a chance here on the last day of the session to have something done. And Senator Kirk, thank you so much for your support over in the Senate on this bill. I do represent victims of childhood sexual abuse. I represent victims from the Darlington School up in Rome, victims involved in Boy Scouts cases, victims involved in cases involving churches as well. I've handled these kinds of cases for a number of years, for a very long time. I have a very real and personal knowledge of just how difficult and almost impossible it is to be able to prevail in one of these cases in our state. And I'll tell you some facts that matter. 46 states have passed laws that would allow victims of childhood sexual abuse to to be able to file suits or file claims against entities that covered it up, as well as the predators. As recently as since 2015, 17 states have passed laws that are far better than any of the bills that have been presented this session in Georgia. Just this year alone, we've had 3, 4, I think maybe 5 bills that have been passed. Most recently, there was one passed in Michigan and Pennsylvania. Obviously, with what all of the events that have occurred with Michigan State and Larry Nassar, and most recently with the dean being arrested a couple of days ago, obviously they had a lot of reason to act. We also have the other part of that, the whole genesis with Brian Cornwell, who's already addressed you today, who without his tireless work, the USA Gymnastics case would not have been uncovered, and perhaps we'd be 5 years down the road before we even knew what was going on with that case. And that case originated in the state of Georgia, and there are victims from that case that have been completely written out of House Bill 605. And there's a sheet that's been kind of floating around. You've heard from a couple of victims who have, and actually the better name that in fact my clients prefer to be called survivors and not victims, because they are survivors. They are unbelievably courageous and brave individuals who have come forward to tell their stories. And there's a sheet that's been passed around, and these are the known victims. These are the folks that we know in the state of Georgia who have come forward, who have told their stories like Alan did, and Steve Wimberly is here. I think he may talk to you in a little bit, and Rob Lawson and Mr. Lawson's
and Rob's father coming forward and telling you their stories, these people specifically came forward and they asked our legislature for help. The House heard them, and they answered that call. And they passed a bill that was 170-0 on the vote that would have covered every single one of these victims. The Senate, on the other hand, unfortunately, and you know, it's not over, we still have today, but as it stands right now, the version of the bill that has been drafted and worked on out of the Senate literally cuts every one of these people out. Every single one of them does not have an opportunity to file a claim under that language. I don't think that's right. I think something, you know, hopefully cooler heads will prevail, and folks will get together and they will do something today that makes some sense and that actually gives the victims of childhood abuse the opportunity to file claims if they so choose. They may not even choose to do it. But it also will protect our children going forward, and it will help. At the end of the day, what we want to do is change conduct. You know, nobody's saying people are flat out evil and other than the pedophiles that we know of, but the entities that we're talking about, we're not saying that they're evil and that they should be shut down or closed out of business. What we're saying is big time mistakes were made. It's time to stand up, acknowledge that you made mistakes, and let's do something about it. Let's try to make it right as best we can for the survivors, and let's try to make it right and change conduct going forward. Couple other, you know, I know South Carolina was mentioned as a bill. You go right across the river there, and in South Carolina, there's a bill that protects survivors. It's way better than Georgia. Well, you've also got Florida, who passed a law last year that completely eliminated the statute of limitations on civil claims against both pedophiles and entities that covered it up or harbored people or concealed evidence. And you also have Tennessee to our north that has a law. And here we are in Georgia, we're just trying to do something that'll make it right and at least try to help make things better. And I appreciate the time to be able to share this with you this morning. And again, thank you so much, Representative Spencer. I know Mr. Wimberley's here if you would like for him to say a few words. Sure. Thank you.
I'd like to ask if he could come forward, and also Ms. Emma Hetherington and also Ms. Barbara Hartman. I saw you in the room. If you all could come forward, and I'll let you introduce yourselves. Come forward, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Well, hi, my name is Steve Wimberley, and my profession is as a documentary filmmaker, and we focus on political corruption. And I can only see so many similarities between what a lot of the senators are doing here as with other states. Two of the senators on this committee actually took, they're being paid by entities who don't want this bill to be passed. And we just think that this is a travesty of justice. I mean, it's no more than taking a payment under the table or bribery. They're just taking it as legal fees. But this is something that is critically important to how many?
58
Yeah, 58 at least people who deserve their time in court, and that's why this bill is so important to be passed. But thank you.
I'd like to call up Miss Emma Hetherington with the University of Georgia Law School.
Thank you and good morning. My name is Emma Hetherington, and I'm an assistant clinical professor at the University of Georgia School of Law. I'm also the director of the Will Banks Child Endangerment and Sexual Exploitation Clinic. I want to start by saying that I have spent the last 7 years of my career representing survivors, and that most of those survivors were victims of child sexual abuse. I have never one day profited from any of my cases. I'm a public interest lawyer, and most importantly, I'm a child advocate. In watching this process through the House and the Senate amendments, I could not help but think about studies about disclosure of child sexual abuse. Children throughout much of their childhood are going to disclose to authority figures in a variety of manners. The way that we react as people in positions of authority as adults is going to highly affect the rest of their lives, whether or not we believe them, whether or not we receive their disclosure as valid. Similarly, with the Senate amendments, countless numbers of adults have come forward to say, I was abused as a child, and that these entities knew or should have known or consciously disregarded information about my abuser and chose to protect them over me. They're being re-victimized all over again. There are, like I mentioned, there are several studies that show that this is true. In sitting in the Senate Judiciary Committee and hearing the amendments that were made after the House bill passed unanimously, one of the statements that was made that the amendments were meant to balance the victim's rights and the entity's rights to due process. So I went back and I did a survey of all of the intakes that my clinic has done over the last little over 2 years. Under House Bill 605, as unanimously passed, 100% of those survivors would have access to the civil justice system. After the Senate amendments, only 12.5%. That is not a balance. That is a gross injustice. If this legislature truly wants to tell victims, to tell survivors that they matter, that we believe them, that we want to protect them, then they need to do more than protect entities. I always teach my students that when people come forward and disclose sexual abuse to us, to receive it, to listen to them, to always believe it is valid, because most claims are true. 60% of children who are sexually abused will be abused by people they know outside of the family. Those are our church pastors, our Boy Scout troop leaders. This is what we know to be true. Yesterday in the AJC, there were 2 articles that came out. One about a teacher who was sexually abusing students, and then one about a pastor who was sexually abusing children in the church. This is a daily occurrence, and we know this, and we should be protecting children. Thank you.
And also, I just would like to recognize Mr. Mike Griffin, if he could come forward with the Georgia Baptist Mission Boards, and Ms. Barbara Hartman with the Chattahoochee.
Before he does, can I say
Yes,
something?
sir.
'Cause I
Yes,
kinda
please.
have a busy day.
Yes, you do.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to say I'm here. I'm the senator carrying 605 in the Senate, and I just want to make a statement. And then I've got a busy day. I've got a lot of work ahead of me. In fact, Representative Spencer and I were in conference yesterday up to 4 o'clock, and corresponded a little bit after that as well. We've had a lot of conferences. I've been here 4 years. I've carried, the first bill I carried was the hot car bill that took care of children left in hot cars and older adults that couldn't take care of themselves. You can break and enter a car now and rescue that person. I also carried the religious liberties bill a few years ago, and believe me, that was a big bill. Last year I carried back the badge legislation, and this year I'm carrying this, and I carried cops legislation. So I've carried a lot of important legislation here. Let me say a few comments about what I've heard here today. And I can only speak, Mr. Cornwell, to my character. And my character doesn't rise or fall on whether you agree with me or not. My character rises or falls on my 54 years on this earth and what I have done. And I have stood for people who were disadvantaged and so forth. I'm a licensed therapist. I've been in therapy with people when that moment broke, that the revelation came. I know what that's like on the clinical side, okay? My colleagues in the Senate also stand on their character. And I have been in the middle of this more than anybody in the Senate. And I do not see what has been alluded to here, that there's coercion or anything like that, or there's people with bad character and there's selfish motivations. I don't see that at all. What I see is a deliberate process. And Representative Spencer, I've told you this before, and I'll say it again. I've spent as much time on this bill as I have any other bill, maybe even more. than any other bill since I've been here. So let me tell you where I stand as a senator and way I see my body working, the chamber of the Senate working, and that is we are a deliberate body. And we do want to do what's right. We want to balance it. We do want to bring a balance. There's a balance somewhere. There's the emotional side. I understand that probably better than most people in my chamber, okay, because I do work in the field of psychology, of counseling psychology. And there's also the side, I've also been a minister of a church. Sexual abuse happens everywhere. One of the conversations I had with the governor about this very bill, I said, you know, Governor, we have children at the state capitol every day that we're in session up here. You know, something could happen to one of those children in the bathroom here at the Capitol. Does that make the Georgia State Capitol an egregious entity? I don't think so. So you got to find a balance somewhere, and that's exactly what me and my colleagues are doing. That's exactly what we've tried to reach in the meetings that you and I have had, and there are multiple meetings. Many times we've talked on the phone till probably 11 o'clock at night and met that next morning at 8 o'clock in my office, have we not? On more than one occasion. So please, don't try to throw my colleagues under the bus. They stand on their character. I stand on my character. We're a deliberate body. We're going to do what is right today in the Georgia State Senate. Thank you. I got to go to work.
Well, thank you. As you all see, the Senate has a heavy heart on this bill. They know that the pressure is on them to do the right thing. Like I said in my introductory statement, there are good people in the Senate. But this is a hard issue. It's an extraordinary issue. But it's time to act. It is time to act. Mr. Griffin.
My name is Mike Griffin. I'm Public Affairs Representative for the Georgia Baptist Mission Board. Georgia Baptist Mission Board represents about 3,600 churches, 1.3 million Georgians. We stand to be impacted by this bill as an entity as much as anybody. And we've worked with Representative Spencer, and we want to commend him for the ability to work with him. And we supported the 2015 legislation that passed. And we've been working with him on this legislation. And we do agree. Everybody talks about the balance. We believe in the balance ought to be there. But we agree with Jesus when he said it'd be better that a millstone be hung around our neck and tossed into the deepest part of the sea than to cause one little one to stumble. So Jesus has a no tolerance standard when it comes to child abuse. And we want to stand with Christ on that issue. And we do want to have justice as well. For the survivors, but also for the entities. And we feel that this bill strikes that balance. If it passes the Senate, if it adopts the language that was passed by the House, it will be the highest standard upon any entity in the United States, to my understanding. So they have worked hard. I appreciate my colleagues or friends over in the Senate working hard as well, but I know there was a lot of time spent in the House, in the Judiciary Committee, a lot of public comments and work on the bill about how they came to a very high standard that they felt was just, but also would give the relief that was needed to the survivors as well. So we stand with Representative Spencer, and we're prayerful today that we'll get a good bill somehow, and that the standards that we see over in the House will be maintained. Thank you.
Ms. Hartman, you want to speak? And then this will be our last speaker.
I think most of you have heard from the witnesses, the testimonies, from the victims, and from those who are trying to pass the bill. I think you've heard quite a bit, and I don't think I have a lot to add. But I'm Barbara Hartman. I'm president of the Chattahoochee Republican Women's Club and a member of the Georgia Federation of Republican Women. I have talked to many, many Republican women, and I'm sure Democrat women are the same, who want this bill passed. They are tired of the sexual abuse of children, and they are tired of entities not being held responsible, but allowing these sexual predators to continue their work. This bill will be a step to put an end to sexual predating of children. It's an important bill. It needs to be passed. The Lieutenant Governor, Casey Cagle, who is running for governor, holds the key right now to getting this passed. The leadership in the House and the leadership in the Senate are very, very powerful. They can be bullies, and they can determine which legislation does get passed and which does not. Our Lieutenant Governor is up for election as governor, and I urge him to stand up for the children of Georgia and to pass this bill, and not to let the lobbying efforts of the entities such as Boy Scouts, who are paying a tremendous amount of money to their lobbyist, or to the Chamber of Commerce, the Insurance Agency, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, the Catholic Church. Please don't let them trump the children of Georgia and the people of Georgia. Please let the people of Georgia have a say in this. I think it's something like 90% or more of Georgians want this bill passed, and it's time that we as Georgians and we as Republicans take back our government and not leave it up to those who are listening to well-paid lobbyists. Thank you very much.
And finally, again, we'd like to state an urgency and ask the Senate to act today on a meaningful bill. We still have time. I ask on Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle to exert your influence on this process. I know he wants to do the right thing. We have spoke about this bill, and so I will open up for any questions at this point. Sir. House Bill 605 is in the Senate, and is, to my knowledge, it's number 11 on the calendar to be voted on today. I'm not sure when that will come up for a vote. And so House Bill 605 right now is in the Senate. There is discussion about even more watering down the bill as it is now, as it came out of committee with potential floor amendments. So my hope is that the Senate will do the right thing and give us a meaningful bill. If they could just get it back to the House, we could try to get it into conference. That's where the House Bill 605 is.
Question for Mr. Tanner, just to clarify something. Did you say that some plaintiffs in the cases against USA Gymnastics had to be dropped because they lived in Georgia and therefore could not sue? Was that what you said?
That's probably a better question for Brian, since he's the one who is the genesis of all of that. But my understanding is, and you can clarify it one way or the other, is that many of the victims, we saw 153 people come forward and give statements at the Larry Nassar sentencing hearing. Under our bill, the Senate version of this language, virtually all of them would be cut out of the bill. They would not be able to bring claims. And you probably have more information.
I can touch on that very briefly. Our case uncovered a systemic issue with complaints against coaches within USA Gymnastics, and as a result, the USA Today and the Indy Star did an expose that was printed on the front page of the USA Today the day before the Olympics started back in 2016. That investigation into our case led to all of the Nassar victims coming forward. And as a direct result of those Nassar victims coming forward, you saw the 2 weeks of gut-wrenching testimony on every national news organization across the country. But to answer your question specifically, yes, there will be victims that will be cut out of the loop if the Senate amendments to House Bill 605 pass. And so part of the reason I'm here is that while I don't have any of those cases right now, and it doesn't matter if I get any, the fact is that they don't have a remedy and have not had a remedy. And for a guy who's litigated this case for 5 years and who's had it for a decade and who's worked it for a decade, I will tell you that Georgia law is nearly impossible to bring a case of sexual abuse against an entity. We had a specific set of facts that saved us. And if it wasn't for those specific set of facts, under Georgia law, we'd be out in the cold and Larry Nassar would still be molesting victims.
Any other questions? Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming. This concludes the press conference. Thank you.